Hi, I'm Corey Christiansen, and I'm here with great bassist Jeff Berlin. Jeff, how did you get started playing the bass?
I was a violinist originally. I started in 1958, played violin. My father guided me towards a musical education, and there was always classical music in the house, and they thought I had a gift for music, so they gave me lessons, and I played violin a good 10 years. I'm trained, I'm a orchestra violinist by nature, and I played a lot of serious music, classical music over the years, and studied quite religiously, and one day gave it up for electric bass. I just decided I didn't want to play violin anymore.
How old were you?
I played violin till I was 16, but I got my first electric bass when I was 14, which was in 1967. I got my first electric bass. I sold newspapers, earned some money.
Yeah, that's great.
Went down to Barrows Music on Middle Neck Road in Great Neck, New York, and it's not there anymore. Yeah. And I bought the bass, and I was a bass player from 14 on.
Wow, that's fantastic. So delivering papers bought the bass.
Newspapers bought me my bass because I started things and quit things, and my parents weren't entirely into me becoming a bass player. Yeah. I tried to be a drummer. They didn't like the fact that there would be noise in the house, so they kind of vetoed that.
Right.
And I got the bass because violin is tuned G, D, A, and E,
right,
but from low to high. And I thought a bass, in those days all we had were 4 strings, and pretty much. And right. I thought it was a 4-string instrument tuned with the same notes as a violin had. And I thought it couldn't be that hard for me to learn, so I got myself an electric bass and proceeded to play it and practice it.
Yeah, and so about what age did you get into playing jazz? And even before you were playing jazz, who were some of your early influences? I mean, that you really looked up to
on electric bass? Jack Bruce.
Jack Bruce.
Hands down for me, even to this day. Jack is the only guy that makes me nervous when I know he's there when I play. One time we did a gig in Germany, and he came in, sat front row, folded his arms, and looked up at me, and I was a goner. I mean, it was end of story because he holds a very special place for me, and I am deeply a fan. You know, we know each other, we're friends, but his bass playing in Cream was revolutionary, and the early Cream albums, the live ones, were those special moments where Eric playing the blues left a lot of tonal room for Jack to change the root. Often he was the first bass player that did not play a root certain times, and he's also, I think, the first virtuoso bass player in history. So as a bass player, really, in rock, it was Jack Bruce, hands down. Tim Bogert too. Tim Bogert too, the break song they did on the Near the Beginning record was like real influential for me. And I knew Tim, and I would play a solo for him sometimes. I mean, Tim was important to me. And I stayed on that till I got about 19 or so when I went up north to study at Berklee, and then I became a very converted, into jazz. I was a jazz musician and still am.
Were there any records that really, had profound influence on you at Berklee that you said, oh boy, jazz, this is what I've got to do?
There were 2 records. It's funny you should ask that. One was a Joe Pass album, and I don't remember the name. I was at one of the guys' house, and I heard this sort of...
Right.
And I said, this guy sounds incredible. What is this?
Yeah, right.
And
those Joe Pass records had that effect on a lot of us.
On a lot of people.
Yeah, what is this?
What is this? This remarkable linear, guitar playing. Right. So as a bass player, I didn't hear these things, and I wanted to know about them. Right. Another one, interestingly, was Gary Burton. I think it was Throb he had done, or a Genuine Tongue Funeral. I had heard Gary, and then he was teaching up there, and I saw him playing in ensembles at Berklee, and I was deeply, deeply moved by the brilliance of this guy. Even to today, I still regard Gary as maybe one of the greatest jazz musicians in the world. He's mostly retired. I think he doesn't want to keep playing. I don't know what his future plans might be, but it's a loss to me because I want this guy to keep playing. Gary was very important to me in those days too.
And through all of this, despite certain trends and developments in electric bass technology, we should say you have remained true to the 4-string fretted bass.
Right.
Talk about that for a little while.
Well, there is a thing with me that I'm very conscious to avoid, and that's bass cliches. And I have probably cause more angst among bassists because I will state that I believe that certain things we do as musicians, as bass players, and the way we play and the way we perform, the equipment we use, the style we use is kind of cliche oriented. And I've noticed that drummers in general, don't have, let's say, cliche oriented drum licks. Some licks are there, some guitar licks, but bass players, generally speaking, usually sound the same. Generally speaking.
Gotcha.
I stuck on 4 strings because I didn't want to go to 5 or 6 because it's not only I believe, I know you don't play better on more strings. You play better with more knowledge of music and more understanding of music. So I stuck on 4 strings because this to me, and I've used this word in clinics, this is the universe to me. I have to find ways to traverse this neck. You're a guitar player and you know this. You play jazz, you want to find ways. If you have a 7 or 8 or 9 string, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll play better. In fact, it might hinder what you can do. You usually do better in a limited area than you do in an expanded one because you have to use more of what you have. So I stuck with 4 strings, and I also will not play, in fact, I'll never play an active bass.
Yeah.
It's a personal decision. The active instrument to me is a little bit dry sounding, a little bit brittle sounding.
Right.
I don't particularly feel in this day of modern amplification and super PA systems and 100% gear-oriented, fine, superior recording studios that I need also to boost high end out of my instrument and sort of crunch the sound. Yeah. So I stuck with passive 4 strings. This is an instrument called a Jeff Berlin bass.
It's a nice title.
Nice title. I came up with it, this one.
Yeah, well, your parents came
They came up with it.
That's right.
Just before the bass, the violin lessons.
Yeah.
So I play a Jeff Berlin. It's made by Dean Guitars. I don't believe they make this bass anymore. And probably because the bass didn't do as well because of the fact that it was 4-string and it wasn't active.
It was passive.
It was passive, and I stick, pretty much to the same equipment that I've used forever. I have a badass bass bridge, which was an innovation by the guy who pretty well single-handedly invented the parts industry, Glenn Kwan from Leo Kwan Badass Bass Bridges. He's the singular guy who invented the entire replacement industry. People ought to know that. Yeah. And one of his, I guess, people who worked with him was Bill Bartolini in the early days, and Bill Bartolini wired these pickups for me. And Bill is, I would call him like a medium-sized, impactful company in that he caters really to specific sort of, appreciators of what he does. And these are Carl Thompson bass strings, which I've been using since the 1970s. I mean, I've had the good fortune, they would offer me strings in different, ways, and over the years, would you like to try our strings and have an endorsement? But I've never seemed to find any string that seems to have this sound. These strings are very glorious to me. So Carl Thompson's and those amps, those Mark bass amps. I mean, they're the greatest bass amp I've ever found. I think they're the most musical amp I've ever found, and the tone is exquisite. And I live for tone, so that's what makes it for me.
A lot of my bass player friends have told me sometimes, Berlin, he sounds like he's playing a fretless some of the time.
Right.
But clearly, you've always played fretted instruments. Why do people say that, or why would they think? Does it have something to do with your slurring technique, or your vibrato, or what?
It's my slurring technique and my vibrato.
All right. Tell us about this.
You combine these things. I've always liked to stick with frets. I don't like to play fretless. In fact, again, as a bold statement, I'll never play a fretless bass.
Right.
I will never play one. It's my ear, my statement. It's a little bit of a bass cliche to use a sound that was pioneered and pretty well presented entirely as a fully